Hey, Bill, thanks for coming on today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed coming back to Midland and having an opportunity to visit with your audience and talk about some of the great issues.
Yeah, well, they're definitely plentiful, but you have been hitting the campaign trail pretty hard,
I have.
and I've enjoyed watching it. And I think it's really, for someone that might not be as involved in the Railroad Commission or the politics behind it, I think that that presentation of seeing what's going on in the state and then like seeing you actually touch base with a lot of these communities, it's really engaging and educational.
Thank you. This is my first time ever running for a political office. I never thought in a million years that this would be something I wanted to do or would do. And I have to say, it's been incredibly educational. To seeing how the sausage is made on the backside of the
Right.
political process probably is not for everybody. And I have to say, even my opinions of kind of how the systems work and a lot of the preconceived notions you have when you think about running for office, it's really remarkable when you actually get into the process. And especially being in one of the two major party affiliations, because we have a primary and I have a primary challenger, it's very interesting to see how the whole county system works and meeting the other candidates. And of course, now I've heard almost everybody's stump speech, literally. I mean, I've been around and I've been doing this now for 2.5 months. And it's been fascinating, truly fascinating to see how people learn, how they develop, how my process has changed, how my ability to get my message out clearer and shorter and more concisely.
Right.
My biggest problem as being a technical professional is that I have a tendency to deep dive quickly into the technicals. And it's not always easily relatable to folks who say, like, okay, I kind of get what you're talking about, but I'm not oil and gas background.
Right.
So I always have to kind of think to myself, how do I boil this down? How do I make it simpler? How do I make the message clearly discernible for them that they can say, yes, you're the right candidate for us in the primary?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I mean, it can be a lot to follow. And then like which candidate do you support? And, then it comes down a lot, of course, the party affiliation. But it's not always about the party. It's about the individual. It's about the candidate that's running.
Well, it
And
should be.
it should be.
And that's part of the problem we have in Texas at the moment is that there is a lot of the overall arching narratives of, let's say, DC level or East Coast or West Coast narratives that don't really apply in Texas. And folks here are, I have to say, I have learned a lot about how to target market and message and understand the systems and really deliver what it is about the Texas election side that's important to Texans, right?
Yes.
And that's the driver.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the big things I fight, of course, as a Democrat in running as an oil and gas industry professional, right?
Yes.
Looking at the Texas Railroad Commission, which again, just to remind your audience, has nothing to do with the railroads, hasn't anything to do with railroads since 2005. That's a TxDOT problem. So if you have a problem with your FM crossing or issues, that has to be TxDOT.
Yeah, and that is confusing, but
It is very confusing.
You do a little bit of a dive. I mean, you can quickly discern and understand, but when you hear the name and it was started to
Absolutely.
regulate
Yeah.
the railroads.
It was
and-
exactly that. 1891, Mr. Hugg created the agency through the Texas Senate and House to be able to regulate an unregulated industry. And the industry needed regulation. So the idea of it was correctly founded was that the railroads, which was a critical infrastructure in Texas for moving transportation of goods and services, and also had a lot of issues in terms of various designs and various issues, had to be coalesced into a regulated body, which today we don't think twice about the railroads, right?
Right.
But the reality was that as oil and gas grew, as we discovered Spindletop, we started moving hydrocarbons in barrels on rails. The agency began to have the transportation side of the commerce of moving oil in and out of the state of Texas. And then it advanced further into basically the oil and gas industry input began to have such a large impact in drilling and regulations that the Railroad Commission evolved more as a agency of proration and also looking at design and plug and abandonment requirements for the oil and gas industry. But then where it really kind of falls apart is 2005, because once the agency really removed its true remit, its Railroad Commission aspect of it, and at that point the name should have been changed. The name no longer reflected what the agency had to do. But again,
Agreed.
because it's historically the oldest agency in the state of Texas, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's the fourth oldest agency in the United States, they've maintained this legacy of the name because it's historical
Yeah.
legacy, right? But it confuses voters. People don't understand really what the agency is responsible for, or the size and extent of its remit as the regulator for our natural energy production and our safe delivery of all our energy to market.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that the name can confuse voters, and when you have maybe uneducated or uninterested voters, you do have the voter apathy, which we had talked about
Yep.
before. But I think that some of that can come from just not understanding, not having an understanding of what you're voting on,
Yep.
and what the government is doing for you, or like you see people campaigning and then they're not always that same it's not that same message once they get into office.
Yes.
And that I think that can kind of detour
Mhm.
voters away, that they're like, well, is this person authentic, or are they really going to represent us, or what difference
Right.
does it make? It's a rigged system, all the things that you hear, or things are just going to.
And you know what that is? That's because we have people who don't have integrity and don't have honesty in terms of how they work. They're not transparent. The number one issue with corruption is that you only get corruption when you don't have transparency.
Yeah, because you don't need it otherwise.
Correct. If you knew that the agencies were actually doing what they said they were doing everything in the best interest of being the arbitrator, in the case of the Railroad Commission, of operators, mineral rights owners, and surface owners, and the general public, we wouldn't have any concerns and issues with the Texas Railroad Commission. But the
Right.
reality of it is it's a totally non-transparent system, and it's got a lot of corruption.
Yeah.
It's a pay-to-play system. We have definitively scenarios where operators have gotten bias and have gotten advantage by having large campaign contributions made to our current commissioners. That's a fact. We have a current commissioner who is currently up for election who has working interest in 5% of the wells that her family, as she regulates.
Right.
How is that
And there,
acceptable?
yeah, there is a major conflict of interest there.
And yet, where's our attorney general? Where's the actual public outcry of saying why she should be eligible to be a elected official that has definitively open conflict of interest?
Right.
So this is the problem we have with transparency. And so even things like the Crane County blowout that happened on December 7th, when that scenario opened up at surface, and the Railroad Commission's first remit was to get a no-fly zone to prevent public disclosure of the surface broach, where's the transparency? Where was their following of the National Incident Command System and public reporting of the incident? They work for the people of Texas, not for the operator and not for covering their ass in the situation of having a disaster of treating another issue of the cancer that's underlying West Texas.
Right.
This is the problem we have with the Texas Railroad Commission. Its number one fundamental issue is lack of transparency.
Well, is that what inspired you to run? Because I mean, it's been what 30 years since there's been a Democrat.
A Democrat in the executive elected position. What's interesting about the 2024 election cycle is that this is the one time the Railroad Commission gets enough oxygen space to really get propelled up in your voting polls. So, for example, it'll be the presidential election, there'll be the U.S. Senate election, your local congressional, all 38 congressmen are up. And then the next one is the first Texas executive position, which is the Texas Railroad Commission.
Oh, big year.
Big year. So it's one of the few times there's enough oxygen in the room for the Railroad Commission race to really have merit. Now, like in 2026, there'll be the governor, the lieutenant governor, the ag, the public lands, and then the Texas Railroad Commissioner. But by that point, there's not enough oxygen left. The messages, it doesn't get out. The importance of the message doesn't get out. So this is the one time in one cycle that really does work in the benefit to talk about the Texas Railroad Commission and the importance of having the executive position. Now, as for a Democrat, the last Democrat was 1994. It was Mr. Gary Morrow. He was our public lands commissioner in 1994, and then he ran against Rick Perry in 1999 as governor. Unfortunately, Mr. Morrow lost, and we haven't had a Democrat elected since.
Well, is that part of what's inspired you to run?
No, because I'm not political. Like, I could truly, honestly give a shit about
Because
most of the politics.
as a Democrat, you have an extensive oil and gas background.
I do. And you know what's funny is there's actually a lot of Democrats who are oil and gas. You know what? We just don't hang big Joe Biden and Kamala flags in our office, and we don't talk about politics at the water cooler. There's lots of Democrats in oil and gas. And I think what's interesting about the industry is that the industry is constantly thinking that they're only Republican-based and all your colleagues are Republican. I know that's not a fact. I know there's lots of Democrats. I know lots of people who voted for Biden who are in oil and gas.
Right.
So, the reality is that we just don't feel like having conflicts every time we turn around at the office to have challenges over the water cooler or coffee pot about politics in Washington and others. And I would say for me, like, I am not a political guy. I personally despise politics because, again, there's a lack of integrity, there's a lack of honesty, there's a lack of authenticity.
Pay to play and all this stuff. Business as usual.
Yeah, it's like why do you want to put yourself exposed to the public criticism and this world of scenarios? And the only reason I'm running, honestly, is because of the fact that I see the public groundwater contamination occurring in West Texas. I was involved in it in Tina Cattle Company 2 years ago when I got called out. I was the first responder to the Estes 24 and the Riston 68. The conditions I see in West Texas, as somebody who's been in this business for 23 years and worked all over the world, I can legitimately say they are as bad as they are in Nigeria. The status of how things are in Texas is unacceptable. And I live here. My daughter is she lives in Baton Rouge currently, but, more likely she'll come back to Texas at some point. I don't want to see a future of my kids and grandkids looking at the scenario of Texas and saying, grandpa left or great-grandpa left a hell of a mess in West Texas for working his years in the oil and gas industry. I don't find that acceptable.
Right.
And when I find it interesting, when I challenge the younger generation as to, do you think you're doing everything you can environmentally for your design and purposes? They'll always quickly defend the fact that it's not an anti-fossil fuel message, but they won't defend the fact that they're not doing enough.
Right, because that's, you've got the social stigma, one, of, oil and gas is usually Republicans, and the battle of fossil fuels.
Yeah.
But we're not taking it that next step.
But I tell the Democrats the same thing. I say, show me where it says in the Democratic Party. And I even said this when I first went in last summer to the Texas Democratic Party headquarters in Austin. I said, are you okay with me actually running on a pro-oil and gas platform? And I asked it very clearly. Are you okay with this? Because I'm going to tell you right now that I'm a pro-oil and gas Democrat. And there's lots of us in the industry, and they're like, well, yeah, we don't tell candidates what to say. And nobody here in Texas doesn't understand the importance of fossil fuels in our message. I said, good, because I'm going to challenge the national narrative of this anti-fossil fuel lies that are coming out of the East and West Coast, that's not the state of Texas. Energy is a nonpartisan issue. The Texas Royal Commission race should be nonpartisan. And truthfully, it's just like running for DA. It should be a requirement to actually have to be somebody who works in the industry, either as a professional engineer or some sort of qualification basis. Because the problem now is we have one commissioner whose qualifications are a lifetime politician who's a Grammy Award-winning gospel singer, another one who got in through nepotism,
Yes.
and another one who is at least got a background in oil and gas, is working with the waste disposal side of the house.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of that experience there, but again, with the nepotism and skirting the issues and not having someone that's been on the forefront. And you were in the Deep Horizon.
Mm-hmm. Not only have I worked on the Deepwater Horizon in 2005, the guys from Mississippi, I was actually on days off. When I started my career, I started in Schlumberger in the Middle East. I did wireline services, open hole, cased hole, plugging, pipe recovery, perforation jobs, all kinds of crazy production logging scenarios with coil tubing. And after about 2.5 years in 9/11, living in Saudi Arabia, working in Oman, working through Pakistan and UAE, I said I had enough. Middle East, I had good start to my career. Yeah. Time to change locations. I went to work for Halliburton, and I went to work for Sperry Sun, which had just been acquired by Halliburton shortly there before. And I was on a global flying squad of 6 guys who did MWD, LWD, and directional drilling, wellbore positioning. It was awesome. We got all over the world, did new contract startups, did all kinds of first exploration wells. We went to districts that were shorthanded on staff. So during 2005, I was on days off in Calgary with my buddy, golfing. Well, we were supposed to be golfing. We were in Banff, and it started to snow, right? Nothing like having golf clubs and literally, wanting to have tee times and it's snowing, so oh well. When Katrina hit in New Orleans, a lot of the guys in Mississippi couldn't go back to the Deepwater Horizon, obviously. So they called and said, hey, can you pop down to the Gulf and go out to the Horizon? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to help. So I flew down, went out to the Gulf, and truly was mind-blowing. We had to take the helicopter out of Lafayette, go offshore. We saw the boats in the trees as you went down the delta and went out the river. It was truly mind-blowing, right? And then got out to the rig. I got out there, oh, hell. Probably not, probably 2 weeks, and then Hurricane Rita came through, and then had to come back off the rig. And then I got pushed to Nigeria for my next assignment, so I didn't get a chance to get back out. But I was out on the rig. And then so in 2010, when it blew out, I was like, 5 years ago, I was on this rig. I mean, I knew the guys. I was actually on that rig.
Wow.
So it was really quite something to have the circle closed to some degree of like, here was a rig that I knew intimately, had been on, worked on, drilled well for them. Yeah.
When you hear something like that and you have that personal affiliation with it, it hits different.
It does. And, the hard thing about Macondo was that there was a lot of focus even on like the movie of the drama of a lot of the scenarios that led up to it. But there was a couple key critical issues that were really still not adopted by the industry correctly. The negative testing was done wrong. Nobody still teaches the negative testing correctly. I can ask any engineer out there how to do a Horner plot. And I can tell you, unless you're a well-test ham, there's not a chance in hell you know how to do a Horner plot. And we have failed as an industry to really adopt, and this is one of my big criticisms. After Deepwater Horizon, I committed to prevention. Like, we need to, as an industry, truly prevent the next incidents. We need to do better of making a step change from one blowout per 1,000 wells drilled, which is actually about 2.2 blowouts per 1,000 wells drilled, to another order of magnitude, maybe one blowout per 10,000 or 100,000. I used to tell folks at the time with IADC and others at the well control committees, and they eventually stopped listening. If this was the same equivalent of the airline industry, we'd crash a plane every 2 hours. Would you get on a plane?
Right.
No. So
No,
let's be
definitely
realistic.
not.
Like, we need to do a better job.
Yeah.
So I spent the next several years after the Deepwater Horizon really focused on prevention, and I got nowhere. Yes, I had impact one project here, one project there, one rig crew here. People realizing that, yes, there really are better ways, and there are people out there who can teach better. But did it have enough impact for my expectations? No. So that at that point, I said, I'm done with this. The industry doesn't want to change and learn. It's been 13 years since the Deepwater Horizon. We've had over 1,000 blowouts. We've had lots of fatalities, nothing of the same magnitude of the Deepwater Horizon, but we had the 5 dead in Oklahoma through gross negligence, right? We burned 3 alive in Bryan, Texas a couple years ago. Again, where's the industry response to truly prevention?
Because I talk a lot with people about the boom and bust culture of oil and gas, but it's not just the reactiveness for the boom and bust. You're going to lose your job, something's going to shut down. That reactive culture is across the board. You're reacting to disaster instead of saying, let's be proactive. What can we do differently? But it's, kicking the can down the road, let it be someone else's problem, because oil and gas, even though it can be a very lifelong career for some, it can also be short-lived. And so there's some that come in and say, okay, we're going to do this 5 years, make our money, and then go live in our vacation home in South Carolina, and they're not worried about the excessive drilling that they've done. They're not worried about things that they've seen and not reported. Or
Well, that's a whole other issue.
There's so many different layers there, but when you start peeling them back, you realize that there is a lot of problems that need answers, that need action. But
Correct. So here's the problem with action. Do you expect it to come from the government? Because everything the government does is reactive. Never is there a law passed that is proactive. The government always does things after there's a loss of life and something is reactive. It's the only way the government works. It has to be to a point where the public perception is so bad and the reputation is so bad that the government has to step in and pass a rule, because, again, they always give the opportunity to every company and agency and industry to try to self-regulate first, to try to make improvements. The government just sets the minimum bar of requirements.
Right.
But what we've done in Texas is we continue to lower the minimum bar of requirements. We keep removing the environmental stewardship requirements, and we keep trying to allow operators to be more profitable and focus on profiteering than actually improving public safety and performance and worker safety. Where is that acceptable?
Right.
At this point, knowing the fact that there's 1,000 spills reported to the Texas Railroad Commission every single year across the 12 districts, the fact that there's a blowout a week in the state of Texas that the well control companies are responding to, at least. Where's the public outcry? Because, again, it's not publicly reported, but where is the industry response to this? Everybody sits back and says, well, it's not my operation, I wouldn't have done it. But that's not the reality. Look at the scenarios in which we're handling it. And this is the problem that I have with the way the industry has been, and I've been trying to address these issues in terms of prevention of, like, guys, we can do a better job. We don't have to expose all our dirty laundry, but we have to do a better job, a better perception of how we're operating, taking care of our employees, making sure that they're safe, making sure that the landowners are protected when we're on their locations, that we're not doing things wrong, that we're doing everything we can do correctly in the well design and construction phase, or when we're doing a workover operation, we've got all our barriers in place. And another classic example, I have to say this, once you start running, you get a lot of interesting telephone calls and messages, and a lot of things start to get publicly exposed. One of my favorite ones was a call recently from somebody who talked about the gas storage well problems. And I was like, what gas storage well problems? Again, that's not really my side of the house. I don't do a lot of work in gas storage. But what's interesting is that there's 19,000 gas storage wells in the U.S. And out of those gas storage wells, almost 95% of them or more are single point of failure scenarios. It only takes one thing to go wrong and they're a blowout. The industry was asked, and the API committee was actually working on revising their policies to implement at least a barrier management plan, show where there's the single point of failure, what's the highest risk in a well, make it part of the standard. And the government came in and said, no, we're not interested because it would be too expensive for operators and would take away from their profiteering. It was, again, even the federal government was worried about making sure that profiteering was still in place over environmental safety and safety to the communities. It's not the job of the regulator. The job of the regulator is not to protect industry. The job of the regulator is to protect the general public from bad actors in the industry. And that is the whole problem we have with the Texas Railroad Commission. The Texas Railroad Commission is a bot agency that really pimps out its services for the operators who contribute to their campaigns. It does not represent the state of Texas. It does not represent landowners. You know, look, I live in East Texas. I live in Polk County. I live in rural Piney Woods, East Texas. And I can tell you that there's a difference between ranchers and farmers, right? Ranchers own sections, farmers own acres. And when the ranchers out here in West Texas have hundreds of oil wells on their property that are leaking or failed or abandoned or contaminating the groundwater, and the Railroad Commission doesn't respond, I tell the folks back east, I said, really? I said, what do you think your 10 acres back in the Piney Woods is going to get a response from the Railroad Commission for? Think their district's going to suddenly answer better than folks out in West Texas? And people look at me and they go, oh, yeah. I was like, this system is not working for us. Now, let's be perfectly honest. It's also underfunded. We have 186 total inspectors in the Texas Railroad Commission to manage 1.2 million oil wells that have been drilled in the state, 300,000, 400,000 we don't have records on that don't know exist, much like the well in Crane County, 330,000 miles of pipelines that need constant inspection and pigging and services. There's not a chance in hell, 400 plus drilling rigs, there's not a chance in hell that the Railroad Commission has enough inspectors to be able to have enough authority to be able to take a bite and really truly regulate this industry.
So, I mean, what do you think the reason is? Is it apathy, or they're just
It's
pencil
intentional.
whipping it? And
It's intentional. It's intentional
it's
to
been
remove
profitable to
Yes.
certain individuals for this long.
self-regulation. I tell people, get over here in Midland, jump on 20, do 120 miles an hour, and then call your local sheriff and turn yourself in for speeding, and let me know what the judge says when you do it. Self-regulation doesn't work. The purpose the purpose of regulation is to make sure that everybody is following a minimum standard. We're not doing it. We're self-regulating. The industry is intentionally self-regulating, and it's intentionally underfunding the capacity of inspectors and environmental agencies such as TCEQ, that they are legitimately underfunded so that they do not have enforcement capacity in the state of Texas.
Well, with you running as a Democrat, but not emphasizing the party because it's more about it's the industry, it's oil and
It's
gas,
nonpartisan. It's unfortunately a monopoly of a duopoly system.
right.
So you have to play the game. And yes, I am a Democrat. Okay, I believe in women have the right to reproductive care. Abortion is health care. I mean, if anybody out there says it isn't, I'm like, tell your wife or ask your wife about having an ectopic pregnancy, or she's gone septic, or she has renal failure. Tell me again the scenarios where abortion is not health care in those scenarios. And again, people don't understand these issues. All they hear is, oh, you're a Democrat, therefore
It's just a trigger response.
Exactly. And it's like, when you really look at some of these scenarios, you say, more people would truly align themselves a Democrat if they actually looked at what a Democrat actually stands for. And it's really quite remarkable. But the energy conversation is nonpartisan. Everybody has an entitlement in this state to have access to energy. It should be able to be reliable, that you can turn your light switch on and it should work. You should be able to afford it, right? This summer we proved the fact that affordability of electricity is going to become a real challenge in the near future.
Absolutely.
And hey, guess what? This other concept that's really bizarre. You should be able to trust the tap water you turn on that's actually drinkable.
And that has made a recent headline about the arsenic being found in
Yeah,
tap water in Midland.
Yeah, correct. And so again, these scenarios are where we stand today in our society and look, nobody's suggesting Texas is going to get smaller. And whether you agree or disagree with the border control issues or immigration reform, bottom line, Texas is going to be a much larger population in the near future. Energy is the key underpinning issue of being able to have success. Why was Texas so successful after Governor Perry nationalized or, kind of isolated ERCOT, broke it away from the national grid in 1999? Because as we built more energy structure out, the price fell. At one point in 2010, 2012, prices for energy were like 4.8 cents a kilowatt, 5.3 cents a kilowatt. Good luck today trying to find under 14.8. That number's not going to get better. And yet we're the most plentiful energy state in the nation. And yet we have some of the highest energy prices. we have to address this. We have to find ways to put more energy into the system. And look, it's all shape, forms, and functions. It's nuclear, it's wind, it's solar, it's hydrocarbon. Let me say it again, it's hydrocarbon. It's not removing hydrocarbon from the system. We're going to need more hydrocarbon to run, more natural gas to run our systems. And it's also other things like geothermal, it's battery storage. It's, if we have the geology, it's hydroelectric. Texas is a little flat. It's going to be a little hard to do hydrogeology at, big dams is going to be a bit difficult. But we need to look at the scenarios of how we're going to continue to grow our economy, how we're going to continue to grow our energy footprint. And that is not necessarily just a straight decarbonization argument. Now, the more we can decarbonize it, great, no issue. But is it going to happen overnight? No. Is it going to happen in 10 years? Hell no.
Well, and then the goal
Maybe
seems
a century.
The goal seems to be not to unify and be looking at alternative sources or combining the energy. The end goal is just to eliminate. So when you get that kind of narrative being,
That's why I fight it.
That's why people fight it, and that's why
I'm fighting as a Democrat.
And then when you look at the issues, like that's largely more of a Democratic stance to
But it's
to encourage.
it's a national Democratic stance, right? So that's the problem with this argument. That is the outside perspective being driven in Texas.
That's the outside perspective. Well, but that's the problem. And I think that like when we really look at the root of all of our problems, it is perspective. And that perception is everything. And the lack of education and transparency is where the smoke and mirrors stay 100%. In place. And we can't really get anywhere. And so we keep talking about, we're this doomsday mentality, but we're creating it ourselves, or our officials are creating it. These agencies are creating it because, people go, landowners that have these abandoned wells that are leaking, and they go before the boards and the committees, and then their complaints and their issues fall on deaf ears.
Well, that's really remarkable. I have to say, watching those situations, in particular in Austin at the open meetings, it is astounding the lack of respect they even have for the fact that one landowner in particular, Mr. White, has taken the last year to come every single meeting and ask them questions, and they refuse to answer.
Right. Well, and that shows our broken systems across the board. But it seems like there's more that can be done for change, especially in the trenches.
Absolutely.
When you can go and shake the hands of these landowners, you can go to the meetings and you can execute change. You can bring up these issues and be a part of conversations where they're generally swept under the rug, or it's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to address or talk about because nobody knows what to do, or they might take a pay cut if the solution is
so
not aligned.
I've proposed two things already, and I've gotten some support in the Texas House already. But one of them in particular is to hire two inspectors per county. Remember, there's 254 counties in the state of Texas. In that 254 counties, 253 counties have oil and gas production or had oil and gas production. And even out of that, every single county has pipelines. So there's not we actually need right now, if we only have 186 inspectors total, that would at least get us 550 inspectors. That at least begin to expand this. I'm not talking about changing the law, but just hire more people and have better opportunity for more people to get involved in the energy conversation from all backgrounds. I challenge the narrative as well of a lot of the true equal opportunity employment when we never go into the inner city Houston areas and actually recruit a lot of Black and Latino communities directly from a lot of the neglected neighborhoods. I've never seen a recruiter go in and actually look for rig hands or support staff or people who would love to have the opportunity to work in oil and gas.
Yeah, I agree with that because, I see a lot of people that, there's great organizations that offer the trades, offer the training, but I also see a lot of people who say, how do I get involved? Or I would love to do something like that, but they're so disassociated from the industry. They don't have the connection. They don't have the network. They have no way to get a foot in the door.
Yep. So I've been supporting one individual in particular at Alvin College outside of Houston, and I've been working with them to try to get networked for the various oil and gas shows and things. But again, expecting somebody to go from Houston to Midland for a recruiting event, is a bit of it's a cost basis that's not realistic for everybody.
And that would be a lot. And especially if you don't know the area and that kind of travel and, just being prepared for it.
Yep.
And then you go to an event that's already, it could be overwhelming and counterproductive to be there if you don't know who you're talking to or how to approach.
So I've been trying to coach them and trying to get their Alvin College recruiting system up and running better for having opportunities to actually get to some of these more localized shows and conversations for hiring and where to help their folks get more involvement with. But even at the Railroad Commission side, the other issue we have is that our inspectors are grossly underpaid. We're expecting somebody to go out and be an inspector who has 20 plus years of experience and knowledge and supposed to have true technical understanding of both the law and physical witnessing of locations to say this is right or wrong, whether it's in violation or it's compliant. We pay them $42,000 a year, right? That's not going to attract and retain talent for a scenario. You can hire a brand new hand to go work on the floor and make $130 a year.
Right.
So how are we even realistically expecting somebody of any background or competence to really want to work for the Texas Railroad Commission? So one of my other big pushes is to at least triple the size of the pay, to realistically get onto at least an entry-level structure of somebody in the Texas Railroad Commission to have the capacity to at least match industry standards. We're never going to attract and retain talent if we don't bring up the pay structure.
No, talent absolutely is important. I mean, people that know what they're looking at and know what they're doing, and like you said, for it to be in an attractive position. But how, if the Railroad Commission already has, such a small budget,
it doesn't have a small budget. There's an enormous budget.
Or it
Show me where the transparency. They spend their $300+ million
or what they're
a
spending
year.
their money on. Would they be?
We have no cost accounting. Nobody in the public has any understanding of how much money really goes from the orphan well funds, where the actual contracts are moved to, what kind of back-end deals are made with a lot of the contracts. There's a lot of accusations made out here in West Texas about a certain district manager and potentiality of conflict of interest or direct collusion with contracts. There's a lot of things happening in the Texas Railroad Commission from the financial side we have no accounting for as a public.
Okay, so the budget is not small; it's unaccounted for. But within that budget, the salaries could increase.
Oh, absolutely. And look, we collected $26 billion in royalties last year. Now, I'm not a huge fan of jacking the royalty number up any higher. It's at 25%. 25% royalty is pretty rich. I'm going to be perfectly honest. At 12.5%, I wouldn't have a bit of an argument if it was back to the old days of saying royalties to the state were 12.5%. Yeah, I could say maybe add another 2.5% to go to the Railroad Commission for administrative costs. But at 25%, no, not so much. That number needs to start coming out of the rainy day funds that's part of the royalty money that's collected, or it needs to come out of the higher education, the PSF and PUF funds. They are well stocked for long-term higher education costs for UT and A&M grads and the way the university system runs. And we have one hell of a bill coming for the legacy oil and gas cleanup side. We need to start having a realistic conversation about how we're going to manage this. I would argue that there also needs to be looking at some scenarios potentially of taxation of long-term leases that are unproductive. People that sit on leases that are no longer gaining any royalties or not adding to the royalty system, they need to be taxed on their royalties. Or they need to have a way to allow the landowner or the mineral rights holder to release them from their royalties so that there's no longer any tax burden for it. And then again, start to offer the opportunities for new deeds and contracts to be signed for new production capacity for things that some people are sitting on, and it is truly happening in Texas. There are long-term leases that have been signed almost 100 years ago that there is no production on. The leases are still broken. In Texas, we don't have the Louisiana side. After 10 years of production, the mineral rights return back to the landowner. That's how it happens in Louisiana. In Texas, the deeds are permanently broken. So what you own for your surface rights for the top 6 feet is all you have. Everything from 6 feet below, more or less, is your mineral rights, and they're no longer combined with the landowners. So we have an opportunity to, if we need to generate more revenue directly for the Texas Railroad Commission, to start to tax the royalties on the unused leases that are no longer producing royalties, or release them back to resale or return them back to the landowners for new negotiations.
So there's plenty of room for that financial growth to cover more inspectors, increasing the salaries without it ever having an impact.
Correct. And if you wanted to really have an impact in oil and gas, you could also do the Oklahoma model, where you tax a 1 cent per million cubic foot of gas produced. You do a direct production levy that allows for a revenue collection for managing, let's say, orphan wells, or managing cleanup, or managing legacy well issues, or directly putting it to administrative costs to expand the Railroad Commission. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a possibility. I don't think Texas has to implement the Oklahoma-style approach of taxing to be able to generate additional wealth, but it was very successful in Oklahoma. Direct production tax, and it was a 1 cent per million, if I remember correctly, and it added like $200 million a year to the Oklahoma budget for marketing, which when Aubrey McClinton was alive and a lot of the Chesapeake big push for natural gas is America's future and all the marketing message, that all came from Oklahoma's tax funds.
Wow.
So it's a doable concept. We can certainly use that, but I think there's enough margin in the scenarios now to have conversations about ways to simply reallocate money for the Railroad Commission to really expand its.
There's so many different ways that could be.
And again, and it's not about changing the laws. Like, we're not looking to rewrite the Texas Railroad Commission's enforcement capacity. What we want to do is we want to increase its ability to enforce and regulate the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it's under sufficient in certain means and regards, then yes, we'll certainly go to the Texas House and argue for we need to improve this and we need to improve that. But today, no, we're not in that scenario.
Not at all, because it's the problems are within the agency, and
Correct.
I mean, things that aren't happening, they need leaders in there that are going to enforce that change.
Correct.
Not benefit from the fact that it's not happening.
And today, to be perfectly honest, if the system stays the way it is today through the 2024 cycle and into 2026, it's a moot point. There will be no change. There will be no future change in the Texas Railroad Commission. The agency is a held captive agency that allows an industry to self-regulate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems like it's just grown very stale. A lot of things have just been allowed to continue because it's overlooked.
Correct.
I mean, it's very easy to bypass a lot of these
So when
issues.
if we can get the name changed to, it was proposed previously and was shot down by your senator here in Midland. It was shot down because, again, it's the oldest agency. It's his personal pet mission to maintain its name as being the oldest agency in Texas.
That's a tough argument because I could see that either way. I
But
really could.
But it misleads the population in terms of what the agency's job is.
Well, but I could tell you, just from a general public point of view, that regardless of the name, there's still going to be people that don't understand what's going
100%.
on because the way it's presented. And so we could call it the Railroad Commission or the, Regulate the Wells Commission, and there's still going to be people not understanding.
100%.
And and so it's the nostalgia for wanting to maintain the name from 1891. I mean, because there's a lot of things in history that we're trying to carve out in different areas that don't fit the narrative that we have today.
My thing with it is that it really is the last proposed option, I think, was probably still where I stand as well, is the Natural Resources Energy Commission.
Oh,
because
that's nice.
It's nice because it includes the oil and gas industry. It includes the coal industry because we still have coal mines in Texas, mostly in sunset phase, but we still have them. We have uranium operations. People don't realize that we still mine uranium, mostly in sunset phase now. They're closing up, but we had uranium operations. The Railroad Commission still manages both those agencies. And we also have, and I think this is something that is a really big gap in the system, which is wind and solar. Right now, there is no agency in the state of Texas that really manages wind and solar from the landowner protection side. The surface right agreements are private, and they're actually not into an agency to require standardization or arbitration when there's disagreements, or in the case of Oklahoma in 2021, one farmer had one wind company walk away from his farm, went into bankruptcy and walked away. Left 75 wind towers on his farm with no ability to decommission it. Now look, getting an oxyacetylene torch, a couple $1,000, and knocking down some towers, give me a case of beer and we're all going to have a lot of fun, right? That's not the problem.
There's a few people I think would sign up
There's
for
a lot
that
of volunteers
project.
like, when are we doing this,
Yeah.
right? That's not the issue. The issue is the excavation of the 20-foot deep rebarred pillars that are 20 foot in diameter, and the trucking cost to move all that dirt out and move all that concrete out and restall the dirt to be able to backfill it. It's $100,000 per tower to decommission. So it's 75 towers on this man's property with $7.5 million, right? Well, the farmer didn't have $7.5 million out of his pocket, and his bond wasn't paid because the bonds are over a long period of time. They're usually a 20-year bond or 15-year bond, and they weren't paid in full.
Wow.
We have the same problem in Texas. These wind and solar facilities, they're not all bonded out. They're not all paid in full up front. So what happens? What happens when the First Amendment case happens? It's just now a matter of time. It's not when, if, it's when. What are we going to do? There's no agency in the state of Texas to manage that.
I mean, again, it goes back to that kicking the can down the road that it's going to be someone else's problem. But, we're kind of coming to the end of that type of cycle where there's not much road to continue kicking the can left.
Exactly, and same thing with batteries. We're going to have the same problem with batteries. So I like this idea of the Natural Energy Resources Commission because it could include the wind and solar and the battery service lease agreements. It could look at a future of any potential other agency, any other energy production, geothermal. Geothermal is going to fall under the Texas Railroad Commission because it's a well designed and it's an in-ground resource. I mean, there's no, and it's a production wellhead, and it's a system that's going to be very petroleum-like in its essence. But again, we have to make sure that the landowners and the mineral rights agreements, and again, mineral rights for thermal energy is not quite the same as production capacity. But again, the agency that should be the arbitrator, and and a lot of people don't realize the Texas Railroad Commission has its own internal judicial system. So if you have a disagreement under the Texas code that falls under the Texas Railroad Commission's remit, you actually go through their judicial process, not through your regular civil or criminal courts.
So then that makes it even more.
It's
like
the most powerful agency in the state of Texas.
It's very powerful, but it seems like it's very internally serving.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like it could be like a good old boy type system, and everybody within those walls are benefiting more than regulating for the general public.
Yep. And so I've dug back so far. The last Democrat, excuse me, I've dug back so far. I'm back in the archives 50 plus years online. I can't find the last Democrat that was on the Texas Railroad Commission. And if I've asked everybody at campaign speeches, if you have a fascination for the libraries, you have a desire to want to dig through the microfiche and go dig through the old newspaper clips, I would love to know the last time there was a Democrat actually on the Texas Railroad Commission.
Wow.
Or at least 50 years ago. So
do many run? I mean, is this something?
Well, I mean, we've had people run. Krista Castaneda ran in 2020 against Jim Wright. Roman McAllen ran in 2018 against Christy Craddock.
And I think I remember because I did
Luke
look
Warford
into some
ran in
of
2022.
that. The margins weren't that different. Like they were fairly close, weren't they, on some of them?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a Republican dominated agency, and so it's hard to get a Democrat in there because I mean it's pretty tightly run. It seems like
It is, but in the same token, I think what's happening in the state of Texas, especially as the urban environments have grown, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston for certain, El Paso, these major metropolitan areas, voting impact, 1 out of 6 voters is in Houston, Texas alone. So, like they always say to me, if you 1 out of 6 of your campaign stops is in Houston, you're not really getting the market in Houston. Right. And it's like, yeah, but I'm also representing rural Texas because I live in Polk County, and I want to make sure rural Texas is involved. And I want to also make sure I do stops in Bexar County and Collin County and Dallas County and El Paso County. But Harris County is one of the most powerful areas of the entire voting base. But again, some of those areas now are turning very deeply blue. So what's happening here is that what I suspect in the 2024 cycle is that, and again, the problem with anything that's down ballot from the president and the senatorial race, and of course your congressional races, there's a bit of voter fatigue and a voter apathy and a voter lack of knowledge. So you do see the numbers fall off. The up-ticket side of this 2024 election cycle is going to determine really what happens across the state of Texas. Do voters really show up to vote for the president, or do we have a total apathy of response again, which could happen, right? So again, the numbers are really hard to predict because nobody knows what's really going to happen come November. But
no, it certainly is, and especially after 2020 and everything that happened, and then the misinformation, the voter fraud, the mail-in ballots. Like you see these major headlines that just distracting from the issues, and it does quite honestly, it makes the general public not want to participate.
Yep.
Because if it's going to go into, the courts and it's going to be disputed and now we can't even trust our own systems, why are we doing this? Why are you taking your time out of the day to even go participate?
Great example this last week in Travis County, HD2, House Representative was up for a special election because of a scenario. And the 2 candidates that ran in HD2, 134,000 people registered to vote in HD2. You want to guess how many showed up? 13,564 voters.
Wow.
And the difference of margin was 111 voters. So you don't think it matters? There's a case right there where 10% of the population showed up to participate in our system this last week, and the difference of vote between the 2 candidates was 111 votes.
Major difference. Well, I mean, and that's, like you've been on the campaign trail and you've been hitting it hard.
I have.
And I
It's been
mean,
fun though. I'll
yeah,
be
it
honest.
seems fun. No,
It
it
is.
definitely seems fun.
It's there's most of the events are in the evening because again, a lot of them during the week, so you don't often have a chance to do a lot of midday stuff. So you do a lot of either breakfast events or you do really evening events, and it's been fascinating. I mean, I have to say, from an educational perspective, learning how the sausage is made, how to do a stump speech, how to deliver your message, learning from others, networking, just the overall conversations, educating people. It's been a lot of fun. I mean, I have to say, compared to when I really debated in October, did I really want to spend the next year of my life, volunteering my time and resources? Because look, I'm mostly self-funded, right? I've gotten 14,000 of campaign contributions, and vast majority of it, I don't take any PAC money. I haven't taken any PAC money. I haven't got any oil and gas money. I'm not going into this. These are all personal contributions that have been donated to my campaign. Most of this is coming out of my pocket. It's expensive. I'm not going to say it isn't. It's not something.
I mean, it's got to be tearing up the roads at gas prices the way they are.
Well, at least gas prices are down, right? At least
They're
they're not
down a
$4 a
little
gallon. But yeah, I mean, I think I've driven something like now since November 9th when I did my first campaign stop. I think I've done like 33,000 miles driving. It's insane. I'm always on the road.
Now, do you have your stops set up like for certain lengths of time, and then if just things pop up along the way, you're going
Try to squeeze them in as much as I can. Yeah.
And is your team responsible for getting some of that lined
So my
up?
campaign manager is kind of my scheduler and does do a lot of my email side. So Liz manages a lot of my stuff.
That's good.
And it's really been a huge help because again, you're trying to manage it super small. This is like small business startup. You got a limited amount of cash flow. You've got to manage your expenses, and you've got to structure things most effectively for time and resources. And I have to say, it's a lot like oil well firefighting. And I've had several other candidates say, like, man, I've always wanted to run for state office, but how do you do it? And I was like, well, first and foremost, learn to live out of your truck. Like, this is a lot nicer job than oil well firefighting. I'm not having to go down to the local 7-Eleven and buy Vienna sausages and saltines for dinner. Like, I actually get to go to a hotel at some point, take a shower,
Right,
put my feet up and such. But you really do have to manage it. Crisis management. Next morning, whatever happened yesterday, it doesn't matter.
Because it's a brand new day.
And it's a brand new
I mean,
day.
you could be in a different part of the state,
Yep.
talking to new people that have never heard the same message you were just talking about yesterday. It is very much just that
And
continuous
Texas
build.
is really 6 different states in one because the geographical differences have truly different issues. So folks in West Texas are much more cognizantly aware of the issues to groundwater, where folks in Houston aren't as necessarily much driven on the West Texas issues. They're driven on climate. They're driven on other issues in terms of energy discussions or decarbonization or other issues in terms of export or other topics, right? So the conversation, you have to be flexible in terms of where you're at and what really the hot button issues are. Like folks in Houston didn't even know that there was earthquakes here in West Texas. 3 of the 5 biggest earthquakes that have ever occurred in the state of Texas's history have occurred in the last 18 months.
Right.
Now, you all up here know that, right? You felt them.
It's so interesting, when that really started, like, it's becoming, somewhat of the norm.
By the way, just out of curiosity, how's your homeowner's insurance renewal rate this year? Did it go up a little bit?
I haven't experienced that. I'm not a homeowner yet. But I'm glad
I've heard nightmare stories out here.
I'm so grateful that I hadn't ever taken that plunge, and I think I've been saved because I'm not so sure that that's actually the move I'm going to end up making.
Yep.
I think that it can be so unpredictable. Even as much as we've stabilized, like West Texas is so unstable in a lot of ways as far as like suddenly we're having earthquakes. That's the thing that, people...
Well, they're all anthropologically driven.
Right. And, people don't really believe it. You don't want to believe the narrative. And so we're seeing these headlines like, an earthquake near Mentone, another one, up near Jow, but everybody's just going along business as usual. Like, when did we start having earthquakes? That's not, that's not natural to our region. But that goes back to who is it going to benefit to ignore that issue and continue production? Because
so this is the industry's true crux of the problem. It wasn't just the Antina Cattle Company and the Ward, Crane County, Reeves County saltwater flows at surface that's going to be the death and toll of what's happening. What's happening is the saltwater production problem. And if the industry does not get into enough real recycling of this water to stop the over-injection, we are going to end up in a catastrophic event out here in West Texas. And this is the real crux of it. The Railroad Commission, 2 years ago when I finished the job at the Antina Cattle Company on the first 2 zombie wells, I went to the Railroad Commission. I sat down in Wayne Christian's office. He didn't show up. I got his chief of staff, general counsel, and the lead engineer for the state of Texas. And they told me, thanks for coming to Austin. Chevron hasn't brought any of these problems to our attention. We don't see any issues. Nothing's been reported to us, but thanks for coming. Have some great barbecue while you're in Austin. Right? Total dismissal. And I said, gentlemen, this is a 500,000 acre underground blowout that is bigger than the size of Houston, Texas. Houston's 426,000 acres. This underground blowout is 500,000 plus acres. You're going to end up with a major catastrophic event in your hands, and you have a little bit of time to get ahead of the narrative. Come January 1st of 2022, the Crane County geyser erupted and went vertical January 1st, right? Just south of Antina. And then now, 18 months later, we got a blowout of a ghost well 400 yards to its east that fractured through to surface through the groundwater. Now they're starting to scramble to say, oh, shit, we should have got ahead of that narrative. Yeah, that would have been nice. You would have had 2 years worked
Once
on this
again,
narrative.
with the reactive,
Again, it's always reactive.
that's the reactive playbook.
And it's got to stop. We got to address, the industry has known about the saltwater production problems in Oklahoma since the 4.3 earthquake at Cushing in 2015, right? And the only answer in Oklahoma was shutting in Oklahoma. Eastern Oklahoma shut in 75% of its production. Does anybody in the United States think shutting in 75% of the Permian's production is the answer to the solution?
Right.
Hell no.
No.
Right? So nobody wants to shut in the Permian. But at what point do you acknowledge Oklahoma solved its problem, by the way, by shipping its water west to the Arbuckle? And guess what? Lo and behold, 8 years later, guess what's happening in the western Arbuckle? There's earthquakes. Ooh, that's a hard stretch. And New Mexico solving its problem? Well, they just bring water from Eddy County into Loving County and dump it in Texas. What is Oklahoma doing? They're dumping their water across the northern border as well. What's Louisiana doing now? They're dumping their water into eastern Texas. Texas is turning into the dumping site for 3 other states as well, on top of our own production problems. And our answer is, this is what I tell folks, and this is a legit question. If it's just going to be an energy drill baby drill argument, okay, are you okay with turning Texas into a Superfund site? A non-livable, non-manageable for man or beast environment? If it is, fine, cool. Let's just let the general public know the opportunities to move from Texas to go somewhere else. If not, then we got to stop this problem.
Because Texas wants to be independent and self-sustained across the board, but we're getting to a point where we're not going to be able, with our basic groundwater, drinking water, you become, it's unlivable, it's uninhabitable.
I mean, the 3 things you need for a sustainable society, first and foremost, is access to clean water. You got to be able to feed your people, and then it's electricity. You got to have access to energy.
And we are really straining all of those.
Correct. And yet, does anybody think Texas is going to be a smaller state in the next century? There's some models that predict there's 66 million more people supposed to move here by the year 2100. 96 million people living in the state of Texas by the year 2100. We're at 90 gigawatts, slightly less, 88 and something and change, with maximum capacity generation. So if you're going to add 66 million more, that's 270 gigawatts an hour of power supply requirement by the year 2100. Where in Austin are they having the plan on how to build out our system and be able to have that system designed and developed by the year 2100?
And because we've already seen...
Oh, and let's add desalination on top of it because our groundwater's screwed.
Right.
So, and desalination is not energy free, so where are we going to get the water from? So 350 gigawatts?
So there's no real plan.
There's none.
I mean, there can't be a plan with that because none of that adds up. And we've already seen what happens when our electricity gets strained and our power grid goes
Bingo.
out. Like, what's going to happen to us? Because
This is the question I'm asking in the
these
campaign.
are the questions because, I mean, even with, solar and wind, those things freeze. You can't always
Correct.
utilize them. And then, when the grid goes down and we're over
we
capacity.
Did you know the story about the June 21 scenario after Winter Storm Uri? So after Winter Storm Uri, January, February 21, right? In June, the nuclear turbine up at Cherry Creek Point Reactor outside of Dallas had an unplanned interrupt and it shut down. And it destabilized the frequency of the grid from 60 hertz
I do remember that.
to like 56 hertz and change,
Yeah.
right? And had they not stabilized it, we were 16 seconds from a statewide blackout in June of 2021. We would have had a civil war in Houston.
Yeah.
Right? And I tell
believe
folks,
that.
we cannot any longer accept this every time the temperature is over 100 degrees and every time the temperature below 40 degrees, that we end up in this massive notice from ERCOT and everybody gets their anxiety wound up because of the fact that I'm not sure I can afford my electricity or my electricity is going to stay on.
Right.
That world has got to stop.
Right.
We've got to have a real actionable plan for how to build out our grid, how to continue to expand our footprint and be able to develop more energy to be able to survive and have this economy stabilized. The reason why Texas was so successful, to back up a little bit in our conversation, In 2010, 2012, we had the lowest energy prices. Texas was a wonderful place to come and live, and you had the ability to have extremely low energy costs, and things were reliable, and it worked, and you were able to live here successfully. And it underpins our entire economic model. Where we're at today is we're constantly at the edge of where we're at with our current development, and we're not putting enough money into the infrastructure side of development of our energy to really truly be able to survive a future plan. And again, you don't have to bring 270 gigawatts on power online today, right? But we've got to look at a scenario of saying, as we're scaling this system up, how are we realistically going to plan for 10, 20% a year increases in our volumes to get to that number by the year 2100?
Absolutely, because you can look at it as an individual perspective, like what can we do to be prepared for natural disaster or something going down. However, it's far-fetched to think that every individual in Texas is going to be capable of even being able to figure that out,
Right.
Getting a backup generator or just being prepared. Because, you saw what happened with COVID. You see people will panic.
Yep.
There's always going to be the public panic mode, and then there's going to be the fighting and the looting and, all the things that come with it. And then on top of that, you don't have a government that is regulating things enough to take care of that larger problem where we can be plugging along, contributing, like, okay, well, we can be a little bit more self-sustained or cut back or, throw some solar panels on the roof and take a little bit of that strain. But if you don't have the larger entity ensuring that things are getting better, we're just keeping the Band-Aid on it until the whole bottom falls out.
Yep, 100%. And that's been what's been really interesting on the campaign trail is I've only met one other person literally running for office who has had that conversation. And his goal was only 2030. His push was 2030. And I said, oh, man, you got to push it out to 2100. And he's like, oof. And I said, yeah. I said,
well, because 2030's coming on.
2030 is going to be here like tomorrow.
We're 2024.
You say it, I remember 1990, right?
Right.
And I'm like, I don't want to think about 2030.
We're thinking the 90s were still 10 years ago.
They were.
Because it's like you skip over the early 2000s and the 2010s, and we're like, we're in 2024. We're post-COVID. And so 2030 is very, very close.
2030 will be here. 2050 will be here. And realistically, no, I won't be here in 2100, but I want to build a future. The Railroad Commission should be the agency that should be helping the conversation of how to build a future to 2100. And again, I think 2100, being successful to that point, would be a massive change of how we look at our state and how we develop it. And again, come 2100, if this is right, 96 million people, we would be the largest state in the United States. We would have all of the electoral votes in terms of the impact of being the number one state. We're bigger than California. We would have major metropolitan areas, God help us all, with Austin and San Antonio becoming one megaplex. Oof, that's another scary thought.
It is.
Houston is completely, well past the Grand Parkway at that stage. Outer areas are way further out. Dallas-Fort Worth is literally massive. Between the three cities.
You can see that, especially I'll say North Texas because I'm from North Texas. You can see where, and it's like Midland Odessa is kind of like the DFW of this region, and you can see where it kind of starts, building a Greenwood and different areas where you're kind of building out a little bit further. But DFW, you had this metropolitan region, but now it seems like it's going as far out as Weatherford, and it's really starting to stretch. But you want to hook on a little bit to those resources because rural Texas can be desolate.
It can be.
And so when you get, an H-E-B or a Walmart that's less than 30 miles away, you can really benefit from that. That's like, rural Wyoming. You got to drive 100 miles just to go to the grocery store once a month.
So one of the things I've said is, having worked around the world in 65 countries, the difference between first world and third world, truly and fundamentally, is that one, you have access to medical distributed throughout anywhere you live. There's no medical deserts. We have massive medical deserts in the state of Texas. Two, we have high-quality distributed education in all its levels throughout our rural areas. Well, we have educational deserts. There are areas where quality schools are quite a distance away, and opportunity is quite challenging, right? And again, that underpins really, truly first world status. Third, we have to have high-quality working infrastructure: roads, bridges, mass transit, heavy rail for high-speed rail transfer, for not HOV lines. I tell folks oftentimes HOV lines is not about high occupancy travel. It's really about the privilege to have the ability to afford the tolls to really move it and not have to sit in the high dense traffic with all the poor people. That's really what HOV is.
Yeah, and it truly is, because you can see the separation there. It's very clear.
100%. So
that line.
we have to look at the idea of any major metropolitan city, Bangkok, Tokyo, London. How you move around masses of people is heavy rail and subway systems. And yet we refuse to have that conversation in Texas. Then let's look at the ability to feed your people. Because again, if food is not underpinning the ability, you end up with not having to have population growth. So we have to still save farming, but we have to make the investments, because now our communities are moving way out into the old farmlands, right? And so we have to look at how are we going to, and when you get further out in farming, the problem you get into is that there's less water. So again, access to clean water, groundwater, ability to irrigate and to run cattle and be able to put food supply is critical. And of course, all of that is underpinned by our energy economy. So all I can do right now as the Texas Railroad Commission is bring up these concepts, and I can focus on the energy conversation and protection of the groundwater side. The rest of it, of course, has to be picked up by the other politicians to realize the importance of this 2100 vision to get us to the next century and get us through.
Do you think that there's enough politicians in office right now that want to have that same conversation that you're having?
The ones I've talked to so far have never heard anybody say it, and they're really, truly...
Is it refreshing?
It's refreshing, and they're like, wow, you really are an engineer. Right? And again, I'm looking at this...
It's not just blowing smoke.
No, I'm a problem solver. At the end of the day, this is pragmatic. This is pragmatic problem solving 101. And my whole argument of winning and losing this race, which again is not the win or loss of the race of why I'm running this. Like a lot of people get into politics and they say, well, I got to win.
They want to win, yeah.
Right?
Just for the sake of winning.
I'm in it for the education. I'm in it for the opportunity to change the narrative and to truly get impact in terms of how we're going to address the water problem and our energy problems into the future. The outcome of it is whether I'm the legislator or I put the engineer hat back on and go back to work. It doesn't matter to me.
Either way.
The problem still exists and the problem has to be solved.
You're just wanting to be a part of that solution.
And so what I said is the best platform I could use is to use this 11 months. Soon I get through the primary in another 28 days.
Sure.
I get through the primary, I'm into the general election. I've got a public platform for 11 months to really bring complete narrative shift and focus to the general public. That's the win. Get people to realize that the future of Texas depends on us working together, not in this partisan bullshit of
It's
narratives.
working together, and I think that that's a big problem. That the reason we can't ever get any problem actually solved is nobody ever wants to work together.
And energy should be the most nonpartisan of the topics, and groundwater. The ability to make sure our people have access to clean. We don't want to turn into Flint, Michigans across Texas. So look, it's a win for every single politician. It's a win for the communities. It's a win for the mayors. It's a win for your city councils that people have access to clean water, reliable, affordable clean water, and reliable and affordable electricity. And nobody wants to have somebody coming to their house and saying, I can't afford my water bill, like Houston, Texas. I mean, that's a huge thing on KPRC2 in Houston all the time on the news channels about people get these whacked out, $16,000 a month water bills because they're broken meter or a broken water line or something, right? And the city's got massive washouts of the city. And Mayor Turner, when he was just elected, I mean, he was crucified for what was the water plan for how to manage the city's water department, right? This is a real issue. And when I've done events in Bexar County outside of San Antonio in the Hill Country, the first questions the folks asked from the audience were, to the congressional folks that were running in CD23, they asked them, what's your plan for water? Our communities are sucking up all the groundwater from resources. This is real conversations happening in Texas. And again, we in the energy industry, we're kind of like, our focus is only drilling and production. That's all we have to worry about. No, our goal is to also do the number one remit as a drilling engineer is to make sure you have protected your surface casing from groundwater contamination. That is the fundamental job of the Texas Railroad Commission, is to protect groundwater. By the first string of pipe that goes in the ground is supposed to isolate the groundwater from any contamination.
Right. Well, and it's when you address those fundamentals, everything else can be addressed thereafter.
Correct.
But if you don't start at the root, we're all just chasing everything or just talking, just, giving these regurgitated answers that go nowhere.
Yep.
And then it's, trying to let the headline die out. Or maybe they'll go away, or there's always this sweeping it under the rug, or suddenly it's a non-issue, and the general public might think it's been addressed, it's been solved, but really it's just been waited out.
Well, and that's what's going to happen with this whole issue in Crane County, Ward County, Reeves County, is that we're playing a game of whack-a-mole out there. You plug a couple wells, the pressure finds someplace else, and it finds its next path of least resistance. And I was out at Lake Bomer yesterday. I took my campaign team out, who's never seen Lake Bomer, so. we were out in the area, and I said, "Come on, I'm gonna go out and take you to see Lake Bomer." And then I took them down to FM 1053, where the highways collapsed from the rare commission's failed plug and abandonment well on the west side of 1053, and they were absolutely gobsmacked. You can see they walked around the fractures around the outer end of the sinkhole that's forming, and took them out to Lake Bomer. And thankfully, the wind was blowing from west to east yesterday really hard. So,
Yeah,
but the H2S smell was awful. I mean, they were like, "My God, it stinks." I said, "Yeah, welcome to H2S. Like this is what's happening out here." I showed them Lake Craddock, and I showed them Christian Springs, named for our other two commissioners. And I took them out to see some of the other areas that are currently failing and flowing, and they were just like, "My God."
I think when you see something like that and you physically see it, because it's kind of like, you can alter footage or you can present something online any way you want. You can spin it, you can chop it, you can paint it in any direction. But when you physically see something that's happened or it's been neglected, or you can see the repercussions of that negligence, it's very eye opening.
No, I mean, in these situations, these were mostly P13 wells. And again, the idea that the landowners are ultimately responsible for the liability transfer, yes, but under the conveyance of what happened in Lake Bomer, for example, we need to prove the fact that those cement plugs are still in place and that casing corrosion or something, a surface failure has occurred that is not directly related to the landowner's responsibility. Then it's an oil and gas well that failed. And then it's 100% the Railroad Commission's responsibility.
And that's where they don't want to take that responsibility.
Correct.
Because that's going to just open up Pandora's box.
But again, at the end of the day, we have to look at the Railroad Commission's responsibility and TCEQ's responsibility is to protect our air, soil, and water from contamination. And the two agencies are, you've seen that Spider-Man meme of the three Spider-Mans in front of the van pointing fingers at each other? That's the EPA, the Texas Railroad Commission, and TCEQ. None of the three agencies want to take responsibility for a damn thing in the state of Texas. And, the EPA has a memorandum of understanding with the Railroad Commission, which basically more or less gave the Railroad Commission ultimate authority in the state of Texas. And so, this last Tuesday's open meeting, the first thing the Railroad Commission did was give Ken Paxton the authorization to file a federal suit against the EPA to not allowing them to enforce the methane rule in the state of Texas. So COP 28 rules, now we're going to fight them now in federal court and say that the federal government doesn't have the right to.
See, there again with the overshadowing, with the battles in the court, you can see that from local government clear on all the way through. And so then you don't even get to see the actual issue because everything is so drowned out by those internal battles being fought in the court, like wasting all that time and energy and resources, funds. And so how do we really make progress? But
well, and again, what got me at Tuesday's meeting, I mean, there were several things. Tuesday's meeting was just mind-blowing, but the first and foremost was of course the ghost well problem out in West Texas and $2.5 million spent and no accounting of the
all that
transparency of the issues and what actually happened, no operations report, no incident command structure. Railroad Commission just does it the good old boy way they've always done it.
Yeah.
Ludicrous.
Right.
And it kills me because as being an emergency responder and oil well firefighter,
right.
I mean, my God, we run an ICS system. We follow the NIMS system. Like, this isn't the first time the state of Texas has seen us out on jobs and worked, but they themselves don't actually follow it. And funny enough, I actually had the dog. We had to stop at a rest stop, so he had to use the bathroom. And lo and behold, who pulled up next to me was the Office of Emergency Management. So I knocked at the window and I said, "I'm sorry while you're eating your lunch, but do you mind if I ask you a question? Why is the Texas Railroad Commission exempt from following the National Incident Command System?" And he's like, "They're not." I was like, "Do you know why they don't follow it then?" He's like, "Ooh, that's a good question." So again, that was my personal, like, why do you guys not do it, right? But the thing that killed me the most was that here in Midland, for example, at that Baptist summer school, an 1,100-acre facility, and they put the saltwater injection well 50 feet from the kids' playground area.
Goodness.
So let's see, we want our teachers to be gun-ready prevention for armed hostage situations. So the teachers already have to go through their.
They already have to do that.
They already have to do that. So now we're going to have to make them go through oil field safety training systems.
And they already don't make enough money as it is just in their position.
So let's see. We'll make sure we got them H2S training. We'll make sure the kids are in hard hats, seal toes, safety glasses, and H2S monitors and coveralls, so they can work within 50 feet of their playground
while they take their standardized testing.
While they take their standardized testing, literally on their right next to the SWD facility that's 50 feet from their playground.
Goodness.
And even the commissioners suggested to the operator to maybe move the facility to the other side. But, the reality is that suggesting them do it and then saying the permit's going to be denied until you relocate it.
Again, it's just that narrative. It's putting it out there, and then it can circle back. People are going to forget about it, and then we're going to just move forward
Until we have the fatalities.
and until there's an actual
H2S release in the
crisis.
summer, and that there is an H2S scenario where we have killed young kids at this Baptist summer camp, and then it will be a, oh wow, and then I'll be curious to see are we able to hold our railroad commissions criminally responsible for negligence for the fatalities? It's criminal homicide. So is that what it's going to take to eventually get us to realize that the impact of oil and gas can be criminal? I want the industry to realistically look at scenarios like this and say to folks, all you had to do was on an 1,100-acre property move the injection well to the other side of the property, and there would have been no resistance, neither community resistance. The Republican city council member and precinct, I don't remember which precinct it was, he showed up and he presented just before the vote, and he begged them to relocate it. This was a Republican. This wasn't about a Democrat standing up there or EDF or Sierra Club or somebody else that would be environmentally opposed to it. This was somebody of their peers trying to say to them, please relocate this to another area of your 1,100-acre property. And the Railroad Commission refused. That's irresponsible. That, to me, is a scenario. It's nonpartisan, but it's a scenario we need to say, these guys are legitimately, the agency is working for the best interests of the industry, not for the actual Texas public, not for the actual citizens it should be protecting. And again, the Railroad Commission should be the arbitrator between industry need, which originally was founded for, was to make sure people weren't pirating oil and stealing oil from underneath leases, right? That was the whole purpose of why the agency was formed, was to regulate illegal oil drillers from taking oil away from East Texas producers, right? It worked for privatizing and managing and making sure that leases were correctly, uniformly enforced and maintained. Now it doesn't work for the public at all.
It's just that's kind of an afterthought.
No, it's not even an afterthought. The idea of health, safety, and environment does not exist in the Texas Railroad Commission's mind.
No, not at all. It's very reactive if crisis
exactly.
happens, or if they're forced in some way.
And ironically, it's being forced on them now because of their own inactions. Their lack of plugging the wells correctly in the zombie wells never would have occurred had they actually done their job in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, 80s, and 90s,
And so
and
they're
2000s.
really having to account for those legacy problems.
And then had they actually done better understanding of saltwater injection and subsurface monitoring, I don't know, reservoir engineering 101.
Well, it's once again then having to take the responsibility of saying we didn't do it right then.
Oh, but you're asking an agency to be accountable for their actions for failure to actually do their jobs for the last 70 years.
Right.
Whew, that's asking a lot of our government.
Well, let me ask you this, Bill. What does it look like with a Democrat stepping into the Railroad Commission? I know it's not about the party, but that would be historical in itself to be in that position. But like you're in a unique position being a Democrat and also being an oil and gas guy.
Yeah, and so what I told folks, like, look, it's an executive position. Being a Democrat elected to an executive position, sure, that's a monumental change for the Democratic Party because it's been over 30 years. Mr. Gary Mara was the last one in 1994. The reality is that it doesn't have any bearing on me whether I'm a Democrat. Being elected as an executive, there's a job to do. The Texas Railroad Commission needs technical knowledge with somebody who has actual operational experience, working on a rig floor, understanding operations at the field level, technically knowing what's happening in the subsurface.
Yeah.
That is the goal of it. It's a nonpartisan
Yeah, and it
driver.
does seem like it'd be largely beneficial for the agency to have someone with that background.
You can't be a DA without being an attorney.
Well, there's that
So
argument.
why do we allow if you have to be a licensed attorney to become a district attorney? Why do we allow, or you have to be a bar judge to be able to be a judge, to be elected as a judge? The general public can't run as a general judge, okay? Why do we allow something as important as the energy conversation in the Texas Railroad Commission not be a PE or not be somebody with actual operational background or knowledge? We have no requirements. No offense to Wayne Christian, but he's a lifetime politician. And his Grammy Award-winning gospel album was his criteria he ran on in his 2022 election cycle.
It has nothing to do with anything.
Right, so why did we elect him?
Right.
And this is the problem we have with the scenario of qualifications. And I get the fact they say, well, qualifications aren't the only driver for it. No, you're right, it isn't. And it's not just money. You can't just buy an election. I think there's a senatorial candidate that might find that out very soon. He might have a bit of challenge just because it's money. But it's really about principle, and it's really about having the actual operational plan and knowledge and understanding of the issue core to your core, and being able to have real workable pragmatic solutions to help address the issues. And look, I've told people I'm not out to kill the oil and gas industry. That's a ludicrous argument. The oil and gas industry is critical to not only jobs in the state of Texas, it's critical to our royalties in the state of Texas, it's critical to our working infrastructure, our ability to have a great lifestyle here in Texas. Oil and gas industry has provided a wonderful lifestyle for us to live. No disagreements. I've made my living the last 23 years in this industry and operations knowledge around the world in 60 plus countries. I am grateful for the oil and gas industry and the knowledge I got from a kid from Pennsylvania who not going to Niagara Falls was my big international experience at 19, right? Like, that's it. That's all I ever saw as a kid.
Yeah.
Okay, so to have been on this whirlwind ride has been phenomenal. But we got to address where we're going and how we need to get there, and we really need to have a plan of action, stop the earthquakes, manage the saltwater production to continue to ramp up more work in the Delaware and the Permian Basin, and especially the Midland Basin, and be able to really truly reform this agency for better transparency for the general public. Let the issues be on the table. Let the public see really what's happening with this scenario. Quit the lies, quit hiding the past. We've made lots of mistakes. Nobody's in the industry is going to deny the fact we've made mistakes. We've learned, hopefully. Not always. Sometimes we learn. And there have been expensive mistakes. And there are things that we are going to have to fix long term. Some of the sinkholes and some of the areas that we've created, we own them. We have to take acknowledgement of those issues. Diceta has them. We have them in Wink. We have them We have them growing now in
Wink sinks.
Wink sinks, right?
Yeah.
We got them on Diceta. Nobody wants to talk about the one in Liberty County, right? We've got them happening all over the state. We've got groundwater contamination. We've got old oil legacy wells that were not properly plugged. We've got issues all over the state of Texas. Well, we got to take accountability and responsibility for that. It's not about assigning blame at this point, but we've got to address these issues we can't just keep kicking this can down the road.
Right.
And that's the point of running. To me, running as a Democrat, the way the system is currently structured as a monopoly of a duopoly, I'm not a libertarian. I mean, I don't disagree with some libertarian principles, but I'm not a libertarian. And look, elections take money. Let's be perfectly blunt. You got to have the ability to be able to raise some campaign financing, be able to structure stuff. And Green Party, to be honest, in Texas, they're too far left. I get the fact that environment's important, but I tell folks I'm a conservationist, and a lot of people don't quite understand what that means. It means that you balance the environmental stewardship with your needs for human growth and development and resource extraction. And the conversation should be balanced between the two markets. The problem we have right now in Texas is that our environmental stewardship sits here, and our need for environmental energy extraction sits here.
It's
and
two
I'm saying, folks,
spectrums.
we need to bring this back a little bit more 50-50, where
Yeah,
we
I think
respect
there's a
it.
lot of fear there because you get one extreme or the other. It's drill, baby, drill, or, we're all going to, live off of our
But here's a good example. And I
solar
tell
panels.
folks, I say, all right, so geothermal is plenty radical at Yellowstone. So why don't we set up a couple of rigs and start drilling geothermal wells at Yellowstone? Oh, suddenly you are an environmentalist because, Yellowstone's more important to protect than drilling for energy?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you do have conservation principles. We have to have this realization that we are on somebody else's property. We are taking advantage of extracting the energy and the resources from their property. We don't want to destroy their property. If it was your ranch, would you be happy with the rig crew that leaves zipping 100 miles an hour down the lease road, blowing caliche dust everywhere, throwing their beer cans out the back, trash bag falls out the back of the truck? The foreman who doesn't give a damn about cleaning up after the crew, they leave the trash on the backside of the site. Or look at decommissioning. Go into the old.
All of that happens.
It does.
Quite a bit.
I'm being realistic.
I can remember seeing different things when I worked in the field and things falling off the back of the truck, tools, things like absolute negligence.
Yeah, and so again, when I was running crews and I was out on the rigs, right, I would before we left, I'd ask the crew to do one last check. One last walk around with a trash bag and pick up stuff. Because again, I'm respecting somebody else's property. We are having the privilege of working on somebody else's land and thanking them for the opportunity to work on their property. And our guys don't remember that enough. The one thing in particular for me is that, again, I see a lot of the whataboutism arguments and logic. Well, Nigeria is worse than us. Well, yes, in the overall essence of the environmental stewardship and the issues in Nigeria, yes, they are worse. Okay, but that it doesn't mean that the stuff in Texas isn't good either. We have to do a much better job here. We can't just say, well, what about this or what about that or what about this? No, we need to do, each one of them are distinct individual problems. Our job is to relate and to resolve the state of Texas's issues. our legacy of our wells drilled from 1901 and some of the previous ones. Remember, before 1930, we drilled with wood casings. Most of those casings were never pulled out of the ground. We don't know where they are. They certainly weren't plugged well.
Oh, no.
Right? 1945, we pulled steel out of the ground to recycle for the war efforts. We don't even know where those wells are. Vast majority of the steel that was shipped back east to melt down for the planes and tanks and military machinery, guess what? We don't know where those wells are. We plugged a lot of wells with telephone poles. The Antenna Cattle Company ranch, 15-foot plug was a sack of concrete that looked like an old Home Depot that was sitting at the top of it, still in this cardboard sack. This is the reality. We got to address these issues. And nobody in the industry is in denial of the legacy wells weren't plugged properly and weren't witnessed correctly.
They don't want to deal with it.
But
they're not going to deny that, but
we don't want to deal with it. But the problem was when we created this unintended consequence of the shale development and the saltwater production problem that came with the unconventional resource development. Nobody saw the problem of the produced water problem scaling up to the extent that it's scaled up to. Injecting in West Texas now 18 million barrels a day of water here in West Texas. We have filled up everything. All our shallow aquifers are full. The deep aquifers, the Ellenberger, is expensive to inject into. It's very difficult to manage. 80% of the water is being disposed of less than 6,000 feet. And we have a bazillion wells out here that were poorly plugged, poorly constructed, and multiple leak paths. The water is now flowing every which way from Sunday, trying to find its path of least resistance, and now it's finding its way to surface.
Wow.
We have to address this problem, or acknowledge that the 9 million acres of the Permian is a Superfund site, and tell the landowners, sell now while you can.
Right. And that's not a good option.
No, so again, these are the real issues we have to pragmatically solve. Is it solvable? 100%. 10 years ago, when we started addressing the issues in Oklahoma, it's the Grand Engineering Challenge. The industry didn't like the numbers that it was going to cost to recycle water into fresh water and to the solid dry waste of the salt crystals and all the other chemicals. Okay, the industry fought it and said, nope, it's cheaper to find ways to ship the water west of the Arbuckle and re-inject.
And then we saw what happened there.
And now we saw what happened there, and now we see what's happening in Texas. So the technologies exist. Will there be ways to find ways to bring the energy cost down? Sure, but the initial cost of recycling is going to be high, and it will drop in pricing. Right? Because we'll get it ramped, we'll get it scaled. But we cannot, at this point, try to find another place to ship the water. I mean, unless we want to build pipelines south to Mexico and dump it in Mexico.
Well, and that's just not practical. Like, we can find the solution. We don't have to find that short-term fix. I mean, one, we don't have the time anymore to be doing that, and it's there's so many more efficient ways to create long-term solutions that are going to benefit us now and into the future. We can look at that.
That's the conversation we have to be having. The produced water to fresh water, potable water, recycling technologies exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not. The cost implementation now isn't the issue. The environmental need to be able to reduce the injection rates, to be able to stop the earthquakes is the driver. When we're talking about that homeowner's insurance scenario earlier, I mean, I've heard a quote out here of $17,000 for one homeowner to get his homeowners in renewal this next year. That's the death toll of Midland.
Yeah.
People, because again, if you have a mortgage, you can't not have property homeowners insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's
you're
correct,
stuck.
you're stuck. What are you going to do? And if that is true and that's really an accurate number, and again, I'd love to know more of again, that means that the actuarial science of the insurance industry is saying the problem's not going to get better, it's only going to get worse, and they're trying to get higher premiums, not to pay back, but to protect themselves for their oncoming payments for more earthquakes.
That's a pretty grim future if that's what we're looking at.
That's what I keep trying to stress to folks, the importance of the 2024 Texas Rail Commission race. This is the grim future of our choice of addressing these issues or continue to do what we've always done and expecting a different outcome, which is the definition of insanity.
It is.
And again, if that's the way we're going to continue this process, kicking this can down the road for another 10, 20, 30 years, the outcome is Superfund site. There's no doubt in my mind.
Well, Bill, I really appreciate you coming on today and stopping in on the trail.
Thank you.
You're certainly educating and informing, and I have no doubt you will continue to make a great impact on the general public and understanding what's going on and make a difference with the commission.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Breezy, for the opportunity. And honestly, it's a pleasure to educate folks on the importance of the Texas Rail Commission race. Whether or not I'm elected, that's the outcome. That's the.
But you are certainly making your mark. But I have no doubt that you are going to continue just tearing up the trail. And
like I said, the goal
I look
is
forward to watching it all.
like I said, the goal is to fix this problem regardless of whether I'm the regulator or whether I'm back as the engineering position. We're going to solve this problem. We're going to change Texas, and the outcome of it will be what it is. But you know what? Thank you very much.
Yes,
And
absolutely. Thank you again for coming on.
thank you.